9 minutes on the clock, and the boy just erased everything. 500 people watched him wipe the entire board clean, 20 minutes of work gone, with the eraser still in his hand and a Princeton professor smiling from the judge's row. Because that's what Dr. Warren Gids had been waiting for. He'd handpicked this problem himself, his own life's work. The proof that took him 10 years. Handed to a 16-year-old from the South Side with 30 minutes and a piece of chalk. Instinct without foundation, Gids said. Just loud enough for the front rows is just noise. Somebody in the third row was already crying. The boy picked the chalk back up, and in a hospital bed across the city, a 68-year-old woman who cleaned floors for 30 years gripped her daughter's hand and whispered, "Watch him." He started writing. The room stopped breathing. There is a bus stop on Melender Street that nobody photographs. No travel blogger has stood in front of it with a ring light. No postcard has ever featured it. It is a metal pole with a cracked plastic shelter, a bench worn smooth in one specific spot from 10,000 people sitting in the same tired posture, and a schedule that said the bus came at 6:47 on weekday mornings. Not 6:45, not 6:50. 6:47, and if you weren't standing at the curb before the front door opened, the driver didn't wait. Elijah Tatum was never late. He had been riding that bus since he was 10 years old. First to the public library 6 blocks east of his school, because the school library closed at 3 and he needed somewhere to sit until his grandmother got home. Then to a community college on the other side of the city where a woman named Mrs. Pryor ran a Saturday math circle for kids who had nowhere better to be. Then later at 16 to a university that didn't look anything like his neighborhood and wasn't designed to make people like him feel welcome. He carried a composition notebook under his arm every single time. Black and white cover. Dollar store, 3 to a pack when they went on sale. Inside the front cover of the current one, taped carefully at the corners, was a photograph of his grandmother on her 65th birthday, standing in their kitchen, wearing her good dress, holding a cake she had baked herself because she said store-bought frosting tasted like sweet plastic. Her head thrown back, eyes crinkled shut, laughing in the way that used people's whole faces. He looked at that photograph more than he looked at almost anything else. Beatrice Tatum, Grandma Bea to everyone, including people who had known her for 6 months and weren't related to her at all, was 68 years old and worked the night shift at Detroit Receiving Hospital. Not as a nurse, not as a technician. She cleaned. She pushed the wide mop down linoleum hallways at 2 a.m. while the building hummed with the particular sound of a place where people were scared and trying not to show it. She emptied bins in rooms where the air was heavy with things nobody wanted to say out loud. She wiped down surfaces that other people preferred not to think about. 5 nights a week. 48 weeks a year. Without complaint, because in her understanding of the world, complaint was a luxury for people with more time than she had. She came home at 5:30 in the morning, and on the mornings when Elijah had early commitments, she was always already in the kitchen when he came down the narrow hallway. She didn't explain why she stayed awake. She just made oatmeal and left it on the stove with a plate on top to keep it warm. When he appeared, still pulling his jacket on, she was at the table with a cup of tea she held more than she drank. She kissed the top of his head. She checked that his jacket was zipped. She watched him go. Then she went to bed. Elijah had lived with her since he was 9 years old. His mother had passed the winter before that. His father had been the kind of man who left before leaving was even a question. It was just the two of them in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator had been broken so long that none of the residents mentioned it anymore, the way you stop mentioning weather after you've lived somewhere long enough. The stairwell smelled like old carpet and other people's cooking. He loved that apartment. He would have been embarrassed to explain how much. It was the place where he had first understood calculus. Age 11, kitchen table. A book propped against the sugar jar because the table was too small for everything to lie flat. That book, the one that started everything, was a calculus textbook he had found at a garage sale 4 houses down the block when he was 10. A cardboard box marked free on the sidewalk, and inside it, this old thing with a cracked spine and pages that had gone the color of weak tea. The woman running the sale had changed her mind about the free box by the time he got there. 50 cents, she said. Firm, he had 50 cents. He carried it home like it was something precious, because it was. He read it until he had the shape of every proof memorized, including the 3 pages missing from the back, which he worked around by inferring the ending from everything that came before. He found other books after that. He watched free math lectures online using a second-hand phone with a cracked screen, the crack running diagonally from one corner, cutting across whatever he was looking at like a scar. He taught himself things in the wrong order from the wrong sources in a sequence no mathematics professor would have designed. Nobody told him there was a right order. Nobody told him certain things weren't supposed to connect. That would matter later. He didn't know that yet. The letter from Caldwell University arrived on a Tuesday in late August, not an email, an actual letter, printed on heavy paper with your university seal embossed on the envelope flap. Grandma B found it in the mailbox when she came home from her shift. She put it on the kitchen table without opening it and sat down in the chair across from it. Like she needed a moment before the moment arrived, she waited for Elijah to wake up. He came into the kitchen at 7, still pulling his shirt on, and she pointed at the envelope without saying anything. He sat down. He opened it slowly. He read it once. Then again. He set it on the table and looked at her. And she, this woman who had cleaned hospital floors for 30 years, who had raised him on black coffee and stubbornness, and the quiet faith that the world owed them nothing, and they were going to take something from it anyway. She pressed both hands flat on the table and let out a breath that had been stored up for a very long time. "Tell me what it says," she said, even though she was already reading it over his shoulder. "It says I got in." She nodded. Once, the slow nod of someone confirming what they already knew at a level beneath knowing. "Caldwell University," she said, "mathematics program." "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up and went to the stove. "I'm making eggs." That was the whole celebration. But when he looked up from the letter a few minutes later, her back was to him, and her shoulders were doing something they didn't usually do. He looked back down at the letter. Let her have it. Caldwell University did not look like Millender Street. That was the first thing Elijah registered when he walked through the main gate that first Tuesday morning in September. Not intimidation, more like information. The kind that lands in your body before your brain has finished processing it. Buildings old in the way expensive things are old. Maintained, preserved, chosen. Lawns cut in patterns, actual stone archways. He had his notebook under his arm. He had his second-hand backpack on. He had the bus fare home in his front pocket, out of habit, even though he wasn't going home yet. The Gifted Students program placed 4 Detroit public school students in selected Caldwell seminars each semester. Not for formal credit, but with the possibility of real enrollment if a faculty member decided to sponsor you. That was the language of the program brochure, if a faculty member decided. Elijah had read that line several times. He understood what it meant. There were 4 students in the cohort that fall. He was the only one who was black. He was also the youngest. The others were 17 and 18, products of private schools on the north side with AP programs and math team trophies and parents who had already toured university fichkistas the way other families toured vacation spots. They were not unkind to him. They were just already elsewhere, already comfortable in the specific way of people who had been comfortable for a long time and didn't notice it anymore. He didn't resent it. He filed it, made note of it the way he made note of everything, quietly, without sentiment. Dr. Warren Giddes walked into the lecture hall on the first day and did not look at Elijah. That wasn't remarkable on its own. The hall held 60 students, mostly doctoral candidates in their mid-20s, with that particular exhausted alertness of people who had been inside universities too long. Giddes walked in without looking at most of them. He set his briefcase down, straightened his jacket, turned to face the room. 58 years old, thin in the way of someone who ate irregularly and didn't notice. Princeton Ph.D. 3 published textbooks. 2 candidates for the Fields Medal among his former advisees. The Fields Medal being the closest thing mathematics had to a Nobel, a fact Giddes mentioned in contexts where mentioning it required a specific kind of manufactured casualness. He had been at Caldwell for 26 years. In the mathematics department, his word was effectively final. He decided who got funding, who received letters of recommendation, who moved forward into the parts of academia that mattered, and who was quietly encouraged to reconsider. He began the lecture. And here was the thing nobody disputed, not even the people who had reason to. Giddes was brilliant. Not just intelligent, but organized and precise, the kind of mind that could make complicated things feel almost inevitable in the telling. When he walked through a proof, you felt like you were watching something being built in front of you, watching construction that looked like inevitability. Elijah took notes and kept his face still. This was a skill he'd developed, the face that gave nothing away. The first problem set came back 2 weeks later, 12 pages, every step correct. He had rewritten it twice, not because the math was wrong the first time, but because some of his reasoning jumped steps that seemed obvious to him and might not to someone else. He always thought about the reader B+, one line in red ink across the top, computationally sound, conceptually thin. He read it, read it again, turned it over in his mind like a lock he was trying different combinations on. He could not find the thing he'd genuinely missed. 4 days later, he happened to see the problem set Patrick Reeves got back. Patrick was a second-year doctoral candidate, 24, quiet, with the focused expression of someone who had already decided exactly what the next decade of his life was going to look like. The work Elijah glimpsed was similar in structure, similar in approach, similar in the level of explanation at each step. Patrick's grade. Same assignment, sis. Same marker. Different outcome. Elijah took out his phone and photographed both papers side by side. His phone had a cracked screen, a diagonal line running from one corner, and the crack bisected both images. He saved them anyway, filed them away, didn't mention it to anyone. One data point, he told himself. Too many variables, not conclusive. He told himself that for 3 days. Then Gids called on him in class. Or tried to, looking at the roster. The second approach, walk us through it. Elijah waited a half second. It's Elijah, sir. Of course. Moving on. The following week. Ezra, your thoughts. Elijah. Right, moving on. The week after that, a small pause before the wrong name again. The specific pause of someone retrieving a thing from somewhere they hadn't bothered to visit. He corrected it every time. Politely. Because his name was his name and he wasn't going to stop using it because it inconvenienced someone else to remember it. But he noticed the reaction in the room, a small flicker in certain students' expressions. Not pity exactly, not amusement exactly, something in between. Like they were watching a minor recurring ceremony they decided not to interrupt. Theo Bramwell noticed. Theo was 19, a first-year engineering student at Caldwell, and the only other black student in the honors housing wing where Elijah stayed 2 nights a week when the bus schedule made going home and coming back impractical. He was from Cleveland. He had the build of someone who'd played football in high school and the instincts of some who'd spent years reading rooms accurately. He knows your name, Theo said one evening. They were in the common room, Elijah working through problems at the table, Theo allegedly studying but actually watching basketball highlights on muted replay. You know that, right? Elijah kept writing. I know. He just doesn't want to say it's right. I know. So what are you going to do about it? Elijah looked up. When? Theo looked at him for a moment, then back at his screen. Okay, he said. Yeah, okay. The afternoon Elijah stayed late to ask about an upcoming assignment was the afternoon he understood exactly what he was dealing with. The hall was empty except for the two of them. Gids at the front, closing his briefcase with the methodical precision of a man who organized his exit before executing it. Elijah 3 rows back, holding his notebook. Dr. Gids. I had a question about the boundary conditions in problem set 3. I wanted to make sure I was interpreting the constraints correctly before, Mr. Tatum. Gids didn't look up from the briefcase. Let me save you some time. He closed the clasp, straightened up, met Elijah's eyes for the first time in the conversation. Programs like this one are well-intentioned. I don't question the intention. But intention and outcome are different things. Some students come in here with real potential. Others come in and discover, usually within the first semester, that their ceiling is lower than they hoped. He picked up the briefcase. That's not failure. That's information. And the sooner you have it, the more efficiently you can redirect yourself. He walked to the door, stopped with one hand on the frame. Don't be embarrassed by your ceiling, Mr. Tatum. Most people have one. He left. The door closed, quietly, with complete indifference. Elijah stood alone in that room, not shaking, not near tears, not doing any of the things that might have released the pressure buildings somewhere in the middle of his chest. He stood there in the particular quiet of a large room that had just become empty, and he thought about what he was going to do with what he'd just been given, because that was what it was, information. He opened the notebook to a blank page near the back. He wrote the date. He wrote, Gids does not think I belong here. He stared at it for a moment. Then underneath, he is wrong. Prove it. He put the notebook away. He walked out. He went to the bus stop. He waited. The bus came at 5:23 going west. He got on and opened the notebook to the problem set he'd been working on and kept going. The Holcomb Mathematics Open was the reason the program existed, practically speaking. 500 seats in Caldwell's grand atrium, the stone-walled room with vaulted ceilings that the university reserved for events it wanted to look serious in photographs. A giant rolling chalkboard on a stage. Faculty from multiple institutions in the audience, a live stream camera mounted at the back. The winner received a $10,000 fellowship and a guaranteed second year in the program. Without the fellowship, Elijah lost his spot. Without his spot, he went back to his public high school, where there were no advanced mathematics courses and the library was open 3 days a week. He'd still have the dollar store notebooks and the public library and whatever he could find online with a cracked phone. He could still learn. He knew that, but it would be slower. And slow had a cost he could measure in his grandmother's hours and his grandmother's feet, and the specific way her hands looked when she came home at 5:30 in the morning. Grandma B had signed the permission form with both hands on the pen. She handed it back without ceremony. "You go do what you know how to do," she said. That was enough. The chair of the Holcomb Open judging panel was Dr. Warren Gids. Of course it was. He announced the qualifying round on a Thursday morning in October with the energy of a man who had been looking forward to the announcement. "Starting today," he said, setting his coffee on the desk with a precise click, "every student in this program must pass a live board challenge to qualify for the Open. You'll come up individually. I'll assign you a problem. 15 minutes, no notes, no calculator, in front of the class." He opened a folder. "Pass, you compete. Don't, you're done." He began distributing envelopes. Patrick Reeves received a graduate-level optimization problem, standard difficulty for a second-year doctoral candidate. 2 other students received comparable work, demanding but appropriate. Then Gids reached the back row. He held Elijah's envelope for just a moment, half a second longer than the others, long enough to be deliberate, not long enough to be undeniable. He set it on Elijah's desk. "I found something special for you," he said, already turning away. "Take your time getting started." Elijah opened it. He read the problem. Read it again. This was a doctoral qualifying exam problem, the kind that appeared on exams designed to separate candidates who were ready from those who weren't, for a 16-year-old on a chalkboard in 15 minutes in front of 60 people. This was design. He understood that with complete clarity. He gathered his notebook. He walked to the front of the room. He picked up the chalk. The board was green. The chalk was white. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms get when people sense something is about to happen and aren't sure what kind of something. 15 minutes, Mr. Tatum, Gigi said from the side wall, arms crossed. The patient expression of a man who had already written the ending. "Whenever you're ready. 30 seconds. Elijah stood at the board and did not write anything. Not frozen, not panicking. Looking at the problem the way he looked at everything that needed understanding, from the outside first, at the shape of it before trying to get inside it. He looked at the boundary conditions. He looked at the second one specifically. And he turned around. "Dr. Gids!" The air in the room shifted, just slightly. "Before I proceed, there's an inconsistency in the problem as written. The second boundary condition contradicts the first. As stated, the system has no non-trivial solution. Silence, not polite silence, real silence. 60 people deciding simultaneously whether they had heard what they thought they heard." Gids uncrossed his arms, slowly. "Excuse me?" The sign on the second condition. Elijah turned to the board. His handwriting was neat and fast. "As written here, you get a direct contradiction. The system collapses. There's no solution." He finished writing. "But if the intended condition is this," he rewrote one line, changed one sign. "The problem is well posed. Should I proceed with the corrected version?" Gids did not respond for 3 full seconds. The room counted them, silently, together. "Proceeds," he said. Flat, pressed down. Elijah turned back to the board. He did not attack the problem directly. That was the first decision, not to start calculating, but to identify what the problem actually was underneath what it appeared to be. Structure before detail, the shape before the specifics. Once you knew what you were really looking at, the approach clarified. He worked through the decomposition step by step. Clear handwriting, steady rhythm, each step showing its reasoning not just for himself, but for whoever was reading. He had always thought about the reader, even in a room full of people who hadn't wanted him there. 11 minutes, he wrote the final line, underlined it, set the chalk in the tray, turned around. The room was completely still. Then, from the very back, one student began to clap, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water, then another. Then more, moving forward through the room in a wave that wasn't triumphant or celebratory, but something quieter. The sound of people responding to something before they'd fully processed it. Patrick Reeves in the third row was staring at the board. His mouth was slightly open. He was still reading. Gids walked to his roster. He picked up a pen. He wrote qualified next to Elijah's name. He did not look up. He did not say anything. "Class dismissed," he said, to the room and to no one in particular. Elijah picked up his bag from his seat. He walked out at the same pace he walked everywhere, unhurried, certain of his direction. In the hallway, Theo was leaning against the opposite wall. He'd slipped into back of the room to watch. His eyes were red at the edges. He grabbed Elijah by both shoulders. "Bro!" His voice was doing something complicated. "Do you understand what you just did?" Elijah looked at his sneakers for a moment. The right sole was starting to separate at the toe. "I think," he said carefully, "I just made him very angry." Theo's face went through several stages, then he laughed. Short, sharp, not entirely happy. "Yeah," he said, "you really did." That evening, the video went up. Someone in the back of the lecture hall had recorded it on their phone. Shaky footage, bad angle, the audio catching the scrape of chalk on the board, and Elijah's voice, steady and clear. The second boundary condition contradicts the first. As stated, the system has no non-trivial solution. By midnight, 4,000 views. By Wednesday morning, 19,000. By Wednesday afternoon, it was past 35 and still climbing. Elijah didn't know. He was on the bus going home, the 523 westbound, not the 647 Morsing route, the other direction at a different hour. He'd found a small inefficiency in his own approach to the board problem, not in the solution itself, but in how he'd sequenced the reasoning. He was rewriting it in the margin, cleaner, because it bothered him to leave something imprecise. He got off at Millender Street. He walked 4 blocks. He climbed 3 flights of stairs. He unlocked the apartment door. Grandma B was home early from a shorter shift. She was at the table with a cup of tea she was actually drinking, which meant she was in a good mood. She looked at him. He looked at her. "How'd it go?" she asked. He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I think it went well," he said. She nodded once, sipped her tea. "Sit down, I'll heat something up." He sat down. He opened the notebook. The photograph of her on her 65th birthday looked up at him from inside the front cover, head thrown back, laughing. He looked at it for a moment. Then he turned to the next blank page and kept working. Outside, on Millender Street, the bus stop stood in its ordinary dark. Cracked shelter, worn bench, cold metal pole. Unremarkable to everyone except the people who had waited there long enough to know everything it had to teach. By Thursday morning, the video had 52,000 views. Elijah found out the way he found out most things that happened online, someone else told him. In this case, it was his chemistry teacher, Ms. Okafor, who stopped him in the doorway of her classroom before first period with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Ms. Okafor had been teaching for 27 years. She had the specific emotional economy of someone who had decided long ago not to spend energy on things that didn't earn it. She looked at him and gave him one slow, deliberate nod. That was all, but it landed. He sat down. He opened his notebook. He kept his face still. The girl in the next seat, Jasmine, who had maintained a consistent policy of not acknowledging his existence since freshman orientation, leaned over with the energy of someone who had revised a long-standing position overnight. "My dad watched your video," she said. "Like 6 times. He's a structural engineer. He said he didn't follow the math, but he understood what it meant." Elijah looked at her. "What did he say it meant?" She thought about it for a genuine moment. "He said it meant you weren't supposed to win, and you won anyway." Elijah turned back to his notebook. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's about right." At Caldwell that afternoon, the reaction was more complicated. Because attention operates on a split frequency, there is the kind that opens things. And there is the kind that makes certain people want to make sure things stay closed. Some students who had looked through him for 6 weeks now nodded at him in the hallways. A few approached him in the library, offered to include him in study groups, extended invitations in the careful way of people who had recently updated their assessment of him and wanted him to know it. Elijah was polite. He was always polite. But he didn't mistake a revised opinion for one that had been there from the beginning. And then there were the others. The ones who looked at Tim now with something cooler than before. Flatter, like he had violated an unspoken arrangement. Like excellence was supposed to operate on a permission system. And he had proceeded without submitting the correct paperwork. He filed that too, made note of it, said nothing. The library at 4 o'clock was nearly empty, that dead hour between the end of afternoon seminars and the start of evening study sessions. Elijah had claimed a table in the back corner near the reference shelves, the section nobody used anymore because everything had moved online, which meant it stayed quiet and slightly dusty and nobody asked him anything. He had the 10-page problem set he was working through spread across the table. His notebook was open to a page of half-finished calculations. He was deep enough into it that he didn't hear Patrick Reeves come in. He only looked up when the chair across from him moved. Patrick sat down. He put a manila folder on the table between them. He didn't open it. He looked at Elijah with the expression of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation and had just decided the rehearsal wasn't helping. "I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation for 3 days, Patrick said. "I don't think I've cracked it, so I'm just going to start and see where it goes." Elijah waited. He had learned that waiting was often more productive than responding. Those are Holcomb Open problems. 10 years of them. Patrick pushed the folder slightly toward Elijah. I had them for my own preparation. I'm giving them to you. Elijah looked at the folder, then at Patrick. Why, not a question exactly. More like a word that meant, I'm listening, give me the real answer. Patrick rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at the folder. Because I sat in that room on Thursday. I watched what happened. I watched a grown man hand a 16-year-old a problem that had nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with making sure a specific outcome occurred. He paused, and I didn't say anything, during or after, and that has been sitting on me ever since. Elijah was still looking at the folder. The competition is supposed to be about math, Patrick said. It's not being run like it's about math, and you shouldn't have to walk in there without everything that exists. A moment of silence. Then Elijah reached out and pulled the folder toward him. There's something else in there, Patrick said. Something's in his voice changed. The way a room changes when someone opens a window. Same room, different air. I've been working on my dissertation for 2 years. Part of the research involves tracing how certain foundational results in the department developed. Who built on what? Which ideas came from where? I needed source materials from the early years of the program, so I spent a few weeks going through the departmental archive on the 4th floor. He stopped, looked at his hands on the table. Most of it was what you'd expect. Administrative records, old syllabi, filing boxes nobody had opened in years. He met Elijah's eyes. And then one box near the back had loose papers that didn't belong with anything else. Personal notes, handwritten. Someone had just left them there. Elijah said nothing. He waited. I found a lot of things I wasn't expecting, Patrick said quietly. He reached over and opened the folder to the back section. This was one of them. The additional document was near the back, a photocopy of a handwritten page. Even through the photocopier's flat reproduction, you could tell the original was old. The paper had gone the color of old teeth at the edges. The handwriting was small and precise, dense, with mathematical notation crowded into the margins alongside regular text. Someone who thought in equations and had written the way they thought, fast, certain, without stopping to perform clarity for a reader. At the top of the page, in the same small handwriting, C. Marsh, March 14, and a year, 22 years ago. At the bottom of the page, a formula. Elijah looked at the formula for a long time. He knew it. He had seen it in Giddes's published paper, the paper that had established Giddes's reputation, the cornerstone on which everything that followed had been built. He had read that paper because he had read everything Giddes had ever published, because understanding how someone thought was not cheating. It was preparation. He knew that formula, and here it was, written in someone else's hand, dated 2 weeks before Giddes had publicly presented his findings as his own. Calvin Marsh, Patrick said. His voice was careful now. The way you're careful with something you're not certain is stable. He was a student here 22 years ago. He was 23. Patrick stopped. He was black. By every record I could find, he was extraordinary. He left Caldwell in May of that year. No degree, no thesis, no documentation of why. He looked at the photocopy. His name does not appear anywhere in Giddes's paper. Elijah did not respond immediately. He read the date again. He read the formula again. He placed them next to each other in his mind the way you place 2 pieces of a broken thing next to each other to confirm they were once one object. Did Giddes know? Elijah asked. That Marsh had worked this out first? Yes, Patrick said. I think he had to have known. Elijah folded the photocopy carefully. One fold along the center. He placed it inside his notebook between the back pages, and he closed the cover. He thought about a 23-year-old man walking out of this building without a degree, and without acknowledgement, and without any record in the official history to say he had ever been brilliant inside these walls. He thought about where Calvin Marsh was now, whether he had kept doing mathematics, whether it was possible to keep loving something when the evidence of your ability had been quietly absorbed into someone else's legacy, and the door had closed behind you without ceremony. He thought about his grandmother signing a permission form with both hands on the pen. This was never just about me, Elijah said. Not to Patrick, to the air in front of him. Patrick was quiet. It never was, as Elijah said. He opened the Manisla folder. He turned to the first page of Holcomb problems. He began to read. Patrick stood up to leave, then paused with his hand on the back of the chair. For what it's worth, he said. Thursday, what you did in that room. I've been in this program for 2 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Elijah didn't look up from the page. Thank you, he said. For finding this, he meant the photocopy. Patrick understood. He nodded once and left. The library stayed quiet around Elijah. dusty and still and completely indifferent to the weight of what was sitting in the back pages of his notebook. He kept reading. He had work to do. The next day, Theo told him about Grandma Bia, not with any drama. It came out the way things come out when someone doesn't realize a thing is significant until it's already left their mouth. They were in the cafeteria, Theo eating the kind of lunch that suggested he had forgotten breakfast entirely, Elijah working through problems with his tray pushed to the side. The cafeteria had the specific daytime noise of a university, conversations at 12 different volumes, someone's laptop playing audio without headphones, the industrial percussion of the kitchen behind the serving line. Theo mentioned between bites that he'd run into the administrative assistant from Dr. Sims' office in the hallway outside the engineering building that morning. Dr. Patricia Sims was the chair of the mathematics department. 61 years old, gray streak in her hair, the kind of authority that didn't need volume to be felt. He'd been making conversation in the way you made conversation with people you passed regularly, and somehow the topic of the gifted students program had come up, and the assistant had mentioned something about a visitor a few weeks back. A woman came in, Theo said. No appointment, just showed up. Elijah stopped writing. She sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, Theo said. The assistant said nobody made her an appointment. Nobody told her, Doctor. Sims had time. She just sat there. Then Dr. Sims had a gap in her schedule between 2 meetings, and they asked if the woman wanted to come in, and she did. And? Elijah said, and she had notes on a yellow legal pad. Theo set down his fork. He was looking at the table, not at Elijah. Written out neat. She went through everything. The grade on your first problem set. The name thing in class. The problem difficulty in the qualifying round. She'd done some research, somehow figured out that the problem you got wasn't the same level as what the other students received. He paused. Then she thanked Dr. Sims for her time and left. Elijah was not writing anymore. He was very still. She didn't leave a number, Theo said. The assistant remembered because it was unusual. Someone coming in with that level of preparation, without an appointment, just waiting until someone would see you. He looked up at Elijah finally. She matched the description. Black woman, older, nice coat, shoes that looked like work shoes. Elijah looked at the table. He was building a picture in his mind. A picture of his grandmother getting up before dawn on one of her days off, getting dressed in her good coat, the gray one, the one she saved for occasions that required it. Taking the 6:47 bus going east, the same bus he took going west in the opposite direction. Riding 47 minutes to a campus she had never visited. Walking through gates that weren't designed to make people like her feel expected. Finding an office, sitting in a waiting room with a yellow legal pad in her lap and waiting 2 hours because she had decided this needed to be done and she was going to do it. Not telling him, not before, not after, not as comfort, not as leverage, not even as information, just doing it. The way she did everything that needed doing without making it about herself, without making it a moment, without asking for anything in return. She never said anything to me, Elijah said. His voice had gone somewhere he didn't entirely recognize. No, Theo said. I figured. He picked up his fork again. You had enough to carry already. She probably figured the same thing. Elijah sat with that for a long moment. The cafeteria nays continued around him. 12 conversations at 12 volumes, someone's unheadphoned laptop, the kitchen behind the serving line. He didn't say anything else. Because there were no words for the specific weight of understanding that someone had been carrying something heavy for you, quietly, without announcement, without even asking you to notice, and you hadn't known. He looked down at the notebook, at the open page with the half-finished calculations. He picked up his pencil. He kept going. He found the pattern on the 3rd day of working through the Holcomb archive. He hadn't been looking for it exactly. He was reading the way he always read, with the full problem in view, looking at the shape of things before the detail of things, watching for structure. And across 10 years of Gid's designed problems, a structure emerged. Gid's had a fingerprint, not obvious, not careless, but consistent the way any mind is consistent when it works long enough. You develop grooves, return to certain approaches because they feel natural, favor particular kinds of constraints and particular types of transformation. Gid has used a specific move in complex systems, came at them from a particular angle. The same underlying preference expressed differently each year, but recognizably the same hand. And Elijah recognized it because he had been studying Gids for longer than the competition had required. He had read everything Gids had ever published, every paper, every monograph, every conference proceeding he could access online or through the university's digital archive. He had started doing this in the first week of the program, Not out of suspicion, but out of the same instinct that had driven him to read every mathematics book he could find since he was 10. You understood something by reading everything around it. You understood a person by reading everything they had chosen to put their name on. The papers had told him things the lectures hadn't, the way Gids's thinking moved, the problems he found beautiful versus the ones he found merely useful. The moment in his career, about 15 years back, when his approach had shifted from exploratory to something more settled, more certain of its own methods. The Holcomb problems were an extension of that same mind, compressed into competition format. Now, mapping them against what he knew of the published work, Elijah could see the fingerprint clearly. He drew a diagram in the back of his notebook, mapped the pattern across all 10 years, labeled it in small, neat letters, Gids' fingerprint. If you knew the fingerprint, you could anticipate the hand. That evening, he spread everything out on the floor of the common room, 10 years of Holcomb problems arranged in a rough arc around the central diagram. Theo came in from the hallway, stopped in the doorway, looked at the floor. "Did you rearrange the entire room? I needed the space." Theo stepped carefully around the papers and lowered himself onto the couch. He looked at the arrangement for a while. He was not a mathematician, but he had a good eye for pattern and a reliable instinct for when something was more than it appeared to be. "You reverse-engineered how he thinks," Theo said. "Partially. How his mind builds things, what he keeps going back to." "If you're walking into something built to stop you," Elijah said, collecting the papers carefully by year, "the first thing you need to understand is how the person who built it thinks, what they can't help doing." Theo watched him organize. "Are you scared?" Elijah thought about it honestly. He never answered that question dishonestly. "Yes. Of losing? Of losing in front of 500 people." He lined up the edges of the stack, and knowing I don't get another chance, and going back. He set the stack down. That one. Theo was quiet for a moment. The common room was still except for the building's ventilation system doing its low constant work. "You're not going back," Theo said. "You don't know that." "No. But I've watched you work every night this week. I've seen what you're building." Theo leaned back. "You're not going back." Elijah looked at the diagram, Gids' fingerprint, mapped across 10 years, layered against everything he knew from the published work. "4 more days," he said. He turned to the next page and kept working. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 4 days before the Holcomb Open. Elijah was standing in the hallway outside the afternoon seminar, waiting for the previous class to empty out when his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Unknown number, Detroit area code. He stepped to the side of the hallway, back against the wall, and answered. "Elijah." Aunt Renee's voice, but from a number he didn't have saved. "Baby, I need you to stay calm before I say anything else." His stomach dropped before she finished the sentence. "Grandma Bea had a stroke this morning, at work, at the hospital." He put his hand flat against the wall. The plaster was cold. "She's stable. It was mild. The doctors are watching her and they're saying she's going to be okay. Do you hear me? She is going to be okay." He heard the words. He was working on making them mean what they were supposed to mean. "She's asking for me," he said, a pause on the line. "Then she made me promise to tell you something. She made me say I'd tell you exactly what she said, word for word. Tell me," she said. "Don't you stop now. Not for me, not for anything. You hear me? Don't you stop." The hallway was ordinary around him. Students moving. A bag brushing his arm. The fluorescent lights doing their steady, indifferent work above him. He pressed the phone against his forehead for a moment, eyes closed. "Then tell her I hear her. Tell her I'll call tonight. Elijah, tell her I hear her." He hung up. He stood in the hallway for a long time. Long enough that the previous class had fully cleared out, and the students for his seminar were beginning to file past him. Long enough that Theo, coming from the direction of the engineering building with a coffee in each hand, stopped when he saw Elijah's face. Theo didn't ask what happened. He held out one of the coffees. Elijah took it. He looked at the door of the seminar room. He stood with the coffee warm in his hand, and he thought about his grandmother in a hospital bed in the building where she worked. He thought about her working the night shift in that building for 30 years. He thought about the yellow legal pad on the table in Dr. Sims' waiting room. "Don't you stop now?" He walked through the door. He went to his seat. He opened his notebook. He wrote the date at the top of a clean page. His hand was steady. He stayed in class. He took notes. He did not let himself think about anything other than the mathematics in front of him because that was the one thing in that room he could actually control. When the seminar ended, he called Aunt Renee back from a bench outside the building. His grandmother was awake, resting but awake. The doctors were calling it a mild ischemic event. Serious, but caught early. And the prognosis was good with rest and monitoring. She would need to stay for observation. She would need time off work. She keeps asking if you're all right, Aunt Renee said. I told her you're fine, she said to make sure. Tell her I'm fine, Elijah said. Tell her I'm working. That evening, he went to the hospital anyway. He knew she'd told him not to. He went because there are things a person says and things a person needs, and sometimes they aren't the same. And Grandma Bia needed to see his face. Room 412. The lights were low. A monitor beside the bed made a slow, patient sound. She looked smaller than she did at home. Hospital beds had a way of making even large presences look temporary, as if the room was gently insisting that everyone who entered was a visitor, even the people who had worked there for 30 years. But her hands were the same, rough at the knuckles. The right thumbnail slightly thicker from an old injury she had never fully explained. He had memorized her hands without meaning to, the way you memorize the things you look at most. He sat in the chair beside the bed and he did not turn on the light. He just sat in the low glow of the monitor and the pale stripe of hallway light under the door. He held her hand. He didn't say anything, an hour, maybe a little more. Before he left, he stood up carefully so the chair wouldn't scrape. He straightened the blanket near her shoulder where it had shifted. He stood there a moment looking at her. Then he bent down and kissed her forehead, very gently, the way she had kissed the top of his head 10,000 mornings when she sent him out the door. He went home. He sat at the kitchen table and he worked through problems until the kitchen window started going gray at the edges and the birds outside began their 5 a.m. argument with the morning. He got 4 hours of sleep. He was at the bus stop at 6:41. The bus came at 6:47. Wednesday passed the way Wednesdays pass when you are 4 days from the most important thing you have ever done, and there is nothing left to prepare, and all you can do is move through the hours and trust that what you've built is real. He attended his afternoon seminar. He spent 2 hours in the library. He called Aunt Renee that evening. His grandmother was improving, sitting up, asking about him with the focused attention of someone who had decided that worrying about herself was a lower priority. She wants to know if you've been eating, Aunt Renee said. Tell her yes. Have you? A pause. Mostly. Aunt Renee made a sound that was almost a laugh. I'll tell her yes. He went to bed at 11. He lay in the dark and thought about Calvin Marsh, whose name was in the back of his notebook, whose formula had been in someone else's paper for 22 years. He thought about what it meant to carry something for someone who couldn't carry it themselves anymore. He thought about the work that was still to be done after Saturday, the longer, slower work of making sure a name got put back in the record where it belonged. Then he stopped thinking and went to sleep. Gidda's email arrived Wednesday night at 10:52 p.m. Elijah saw it Thursday morning when he picked up his phone. To all Holcomb Open finalists. Due to a format update, the faculty challenge round will now take place during round 2 of the competition rather than as a separate final round. This adjustment better reflects real-world mathematical conditions in which adaptability under pressure is as important as prepared problem-solving. I look forward to seeing our finalists rise to the challenge. Sincerely, Dr. Warren Gids, Chair, Holcomb Open Judging Panel. Theo read it over his shoulder in the common room. Once, twice. He moved the finish line, Theo said, Fids. There's no final round. You have to beat his hand-picked problem in round 2, or you're eliminated on the spot. Yes, and he picks the problem, yes. Theo stared at the ceiling for a moment. This man is not subtle. No, Elijah said, which means he's not worried about being seen. He doesn't think anyone's going to stop him. Is anyone going to stop him? Elijah thought about Patrick's folder, about the photocopy in the back of his notebook, about a woman with a yellow legal pad sitting in a waiting room for 2 hours without an appointment. Not before Saturday, he said. So I have to solve it. He closed the laptop. He pulled the stack of Holcomb problems toward him. He turned to the page with Gids' fingerprint, and he studied it for a long time in silence. Thursday moved forward. Friday arrived. Friday evening, the night before, Elijah laid everything out on the kitchen table one final time. 10 years of Holcomb problems, arranged by year. His notes on Gids' fingerprint, layered against what he knew from the published papers. 3 composition notebooks filled with work from the past 2 months. Problem sets, approaches he'd tried and abandoned, threads he'd followed without knowing where they led. The photocopy of Calvin Marsh's handwritten page, still folded between the back pages of his current notebook, the date and the formula waiting quietly. He didn't try to work through any of it. He just sat with it around him. He thought about Calvin Marsh walking out of Caldwell University 22 years ago. No degree, no credit. His formula in a paper that didn't mention him. Whatever happened to a person after that? Whatever happened to the part of you that loved the thing you'd been working on when the evidence of that love was taken from you? Elijah didn't know. He hoped Calvin Marsh had kept going. He hoped the mathematics had survived somewhere in him, in some form, even after everything. He thought about his grandmother on a bus going east in her good coat with a yellow legal pad and 2 hours of waiting in a room where no one expected her. He thought about a calculus book with 3 pages missing from the back, and how he had worked out the ending from the shape of everything that came before, had trusted what the evidence suggested, had arrived at the right answer before he had permission to know it. That was still what he did. That was still the whole thing. He gathered the papers into a careful stack. He closed all the notebooks. He checked that the photograph was still inside the front cover, his grandmother's 65th birthday, head thrown back laughing. Still there. Still exactly there. He went to his room. He set the alarm for 6:15. He lay down. One thought before sleep, and it wasn't about the math. It was about a name written in small, precise handwriting on a page 22 years old. C. Marsh, March 14. A formula that belonged to that name and had been separated from it by someone with enough institutional power to make the separation look like it hadn't happened. Calvin Marsh never got to finish. Elijah closed his eyes. I will, he thought, for both of us. The alarm went off at 6:15. He was already awake. Not bright white, not new white. The kind of white that had been washed so many times it had settled into something softer. Something that had been cared for by someone who believed that caring for things mattered even when no one was watching, even when the person you were caring for wouldn't see it until you were already gone. Grandma Bea had ironed it the week before she went to the hospital. He'd found it hanging on his bedroom door the morning after she'd done it. A small square of masking tape on the hanger, 3 words in her handwriting for the big day. She hadn't mentioned it. She'd just done it and left it there. He put it on now, stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the narrow light. 16 years old, eyes that hadn't seen enough sleep in 3 weeks, a shirt pressed by his grandmother's hands because she believed in doing things right even when she was exhausted, even when the person you did it for didn't know you'd done it until later. He looked at himself for a moment. Then he picked up his backpack, the strap held together by a strip of black electrical tape he'd applied months ago and kept meaning to replace, and walked down the narrow hallway. 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken so long that climbing them had become as unremarkable as breathing. Out the front door, 4 blocks to Millender Street. He was at the curb before the bus door opened. On the bus, he did not take out his notebook. Every other morning for the past 2 months, the notebook had been opened before the bus cleared the first block. Problems to work through, threads to follow. The forward motion of a mind that didn't idle well. This morning he sat with the notebook under his arm and watched Detroit go past the window. The neighborhoods changing as the bus moved east. Smaller houses giving way to larger ones. Commercial blocks. Then the particular architecture of a university that had been building itself for over a century. Maintained, preserved, chosen, the kind of old that money makes possible. He watched it all go past and he thought about why he had started doing any of this. Not the competition, not the fellowship, not the program or the qualifying round or any of the structures that had accumulated around the original thing over the past months. The original thing itself. A 10-year-old kid in a South Side apartment finding a crack-spine calculus book in a cardboard box and opening it and feeling something happen inside him. Something that didn't need a name. A door opening into a room he hadn't known existed, and the room was full of something beautiful. That was where this started. Not in ambition, not in competition. In something quieter and more durable than both. The bus pulled up to the Caldwell stop at 7:31. Elijah got off. He walked through the main gate. He had 40 minutes before the atrium opened for competitors. He used them sitting on the stone steps outside the mathematics building with his notebook open on his knees, not writing, just looking at the morning. The sky was low and gray and completely indifferent to what was about to happen inside it. At 8:10 he stood up. He straightened his grandmother's shirt. He walked to the grand atrium. He was ready. Or he was as ready as he was going to be. And at some point those two things were the same. The atrium at Caldwell was the kind of room that changed the way you breathed when you entered it. Stone walls. A vaulted ceiling that turned sound architectural. Voices didn't just carry. They shaped themselves against the surfaces and came back altered. 500 seats in a sweeping semicircle around a stage where a giant rolling chalkboard waited with the patience of something that had witnessed a great deal and expected to witness more. The live stream camera was mounted at the back wall. One red light, steady, already recording. Faculty from 3 other universities occupied a reserved section on the left. Professor Audrey Wentworth from Johns Hopkins sat center in the front row. Dark blazer, leather notebook open, pen already in hand. She had the stillness of someone who knew that interesting things happened fast, and you needed to be paying attention before they started. Dr. Patricia Sims sat in the judge's row, 61 years old. Gray streak in her hair, the accumulated quiet of someone who had watched this room for many years and intended today to watch it more carefully than usual. Her hands were folded on the table. Her eyes were on the stage. The competitors' row ran along the right side of the stage. 6 chairs. 6 finalists, all graduate students, 22 to 28 years old, carrying themselves with the ease of people whom institutions had spent years building confidence into. Elijah sat at the end of the row, second-hand shirt, electrical tape backpack strap, 16 years old. He looked at the chalkboard and thought, okay, just that. Okay, doctor. Warren Gittes stepped onto the stage at 9:02 in a dark blazer, with the posture of a man who had been the most consequential person in every room he'd occupied for 26 years and had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the air. He smiled at the 500 people in front of him. Welcome, he said, to the 15th Annual Holcomb Mathematics Open. Round 1 was written, 90 minutes, 5 problems. Elijah worked outside in structure before detail, always asking what the problem was really asking underneath what it appeared to be asking. He didn't rush. He had learned a long time ago that rushing was just anxiety pretending to be urgency, and anxiety made you miss the things that mattered. He finished in 64 minutes. He spent the remaining 26 reviewing his reasoning, not looking for errors, but looking for places where a step could be shown more clearly. He always thought about the reader. Theo was in the audience. 3rd row, center. He'd arrived before the doors opened. He caught Elijah's eye across the space between them and said nothing, just made a small fist and pressed it once against his chest. Elijah nodded, turned back to face the stage. The scores came back 12 minutes after the break. Gids read them from the podium with the specific-led neutrality of a man performing a task he had not anticipated performing in quite this way. Elijah had the highest mark. Not by a narrow margin, the kind of margin that made the second-place finisher, a doctoral candidate named Bryce, briefly stop breathing while he confirmed the numbers. No editorializing from Gids, no acknowledgement of the distance. Just the results, the standings, and the announcement that round 2, the faculty challenge, would begin in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Elijah sat in his chair. He looked at the chalkboard. He thought about absolutely nothing. Whatever he needed was already in him. There was nothing useful to add. Round 2 began. Gids called the finalists up one at a time. Each received a sealed envelope. Each had 30 minutes at the board. The 5 finalists who'd placed below Elijah went first. Bryce second to last, receiving a demanding optimization problem that he handled with steady, efficient work. Solid. The audience responded with genuine appreciation. Then Gittes picked up the final envelope. He held it a half-second longer than the others, the specific duration of a man savoring something. Mr. Tatum, please come to the stage. 500 people watched Elijah walk up the steps. He walked the way he always walked, without hurrying, without performing, simply moving from where he was to where he needed to be. Gittes held out the envelope. Elijah took it. Gids leaned in slightly, pitching his voice for the first few rows. This is real mathematics, Mr. Tatum. Not an exercise. Elijah looked at him for 1 second. Then he looked at the envelope, broke the seal, removed the paper, and read it. He knew this problem, not because he'd seen it, because he'd read everything Gids had ever published. Every paper, every monograph, every archived conference presentation he could access. He'd done this the way a musician studies a composer before a performance. Not to copy the work, but to understand how the mind behind it moved. This was the problem, the central proof in the paper that had built Gids's career. The combinatorial number theory result that Gittes had described in a keynote Elijah had found on the university's archived video feed, as work that had occupied him for close to a decade. At the bottom of the page, in small even type, 30 minutes. Elijah walked to the chalkboard. He picked up the chalk. He began. The first 10 minutes went well. He translated the problem into cleaner notation, stripped away the layering that made it look more complex than its core structure warranted, identified the main features, made 2 early moves that were not flashy but deeply correct. In the front row, Wentworth stopped writing general notes and started writing something specific. In the 3rd row, Theo leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. At the 12-minute mark, Elijah hit a wall, not visible to most of the room. Just a place where the path he'd been building toward didn't close. A variable not resolving structure implied it should. He stepped back. He erased a section. Tried another approach. 4 lines, then stall. A 3rd approach. 3 lines. Stall. 15 minutes. Half the clock. inside his head, because this was what happened when the pressure climbed past a certain level and his brain stopped being useful and started being loud. Okay, structure. What is the actual structure here? Except I can see the structure, that's not the problem. The problem is the variable won't resolve, and I've tried 3 approaches and they all stop at the same point, which means the approaches aren't the problem. The point is the problem. So what is the point? What am I not seeing? What am I not? 17 minutes. His hand was shaking. Slightly. Not enough for most of the room to read, but the chalk made a small uneven sound when he pressed. A break in the rhythm that hadn't been there before. Gid has heard it. From the judge's row, Heesh has heard that sound and something in his face settled. Not triumph, something quieter. The exhale of a man watching a careful plan arrive on schedule. He leaned toward the judge beside him, said something low. The judge made a small sound of amusement. Then Jid's pitched just loud enough for the first several rows. Instinct without foundation is just noise. In the 3rd row, Theo heard it. His hands pressed together in his lap, knuckles going pale. He said nothing. He breathed. He kept his eyes on Elijah's back and he watched hard. The way you watch when watching is the only thing available to you. 19 minutes. Elijah stood at the board with the chalk at his side and his hand not moving. He was looking at the board but past what he'd written, at the problem behind the problem that he couldn't reach from where he was standing. 500 people waited, and somewhere in that specific wait, the suffocating particular weight of 500 people waiting for an outcome, he felt something in his shoulders give, just slightly. A small surrender of something he'd been holding very carefully for a long time. He looked at the floor of the stage. He thought, I could walk off, put the chalk down, and walk off this stage and it would be over. No more holding this in front of all these people. Just done. He thought about going back. Back to the public high school. Back to the library that closed at 6 and the cracked phone and the dollar store notebooks and the long, slow work of teaching himself things without any of this. Which? Wait. He looked up. Not at the audience, not at Gid's. At the top of the board where Gid's original problem was written, clean and untouched, above all of Elijah's failed attempts stacked up beneath it. He had been looking at his own attempts for 7 minutes. He had stopped looking at the original problem. He looked at it now. Not trying to solve it, just looking at its shape. The way he had looked at the calculus book when he was 10, not with urgency, just with attention, with the patient, open attention of someone willing to see what was actually there, rather than what he expected. And something shifted. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself. Doesn't come with clarity or sound or any of the things that signal moments in stories. One instant he was looking at a locked door. The next he was looking at the wall beside it, thinking, what if the door is somewhere else entirely? He had learned mathematics from library books. Many of them. Different people, different traditions, different schools of thought that didn't usually speak to each other. Nobody had handed him a map of which fields were supposed to intersect and which weren't. Nobody had told him that combinatorics and topology lived in separate rooms and the researchers in each mostly stayed where they'd been placed. So he had just gone wherever was interesting. And what was interesting right now, looking at this problem from a different angle than he'd been looking from, was a shape. Not a number theory shape. A spatial shape. A shape he recognized from topology, the mathematics of surfaces and connections, of the ways things related to each other when you stopped insisting on coordinates. He picked up the eraser, and he erased the entire board. The sound that went through the atrium was not loud. It was 500 people doing the same thing simultaneously. A collective breath held or released, or some respiratory response to witnessing something that didn't fit the expected shape of the moment. Is he stopping? Is he starting over? 9 minutes on the clock, and he's starting over from nothing. Wentworth's pen stopped moving. She looked at the blank green board. She looked at Elijah standing in front of it. She set the pen down entirely. She just watched. Gids sat forward. His arms, which had been crossed with the relaxed confidence of a man watching a plan complete itself, came unfolded slowly. He looked at the blank board, and for the first time in this competition, his expression held something other than certainty. 9 minutes. Elijah picked up the chalk. He started again, not from where he'd been, from somewhere else entirely. From outside the tradition that had built the problem and all the approaches to it. Move 1. He redrew the problem in a different language, translated the combinatorial structure into geometric terms. Drew a surface, sketched a relationship, showed that this number theory question was also, underneath its number theory clothing, a question about shape, about how things connected in space. He was taking the problem out of the room where Giddies had built it and putting it in a different room where different tools lived. It was the kind of move that required you to not know you weren't supposed to make it. Wentworth looked at what was appearing on the board. She looked for 3 full seconds. Then she put her pen down and simply watched with the complete attention of someone who has just realized she is seeing something she hasn't seen before. Move 2, the collapse. 3 terms in Giddes's original formulation. 3 separate complex expressions that the published proof had treated as independent entities were, in the geometric version, the same underlying structure expressed 3 different ways. Once you could see the problem spatially, this was almost immediate. He circled them. 1 substitution. 3 terms became 1. The equation that had covered half the board in his earlier attempts was now 5 clean lines. From somewhere in the 6th row, not meant to carry, but the atrium carried everything. My God. Move 3, the path through. Giddes's published proof had required a computation of extraordinary length, nearly a decade of sustained work by Giddes's own account. Monumental persistence. The mathematical equivalent of moving a mountain 1 handful at a time. Elijah didn't move the mountain. He went around it. 4 lines, a symmetry argument. He showed that the result had to hold by the structure of the problem itself, that once you could see the geometric version, the answer followed from necessity. You didn't need to move the mountain. You needed to see that you'd been standing on the wrong side of it. He wrote the final line. He underlined it. He set the chalk in the tray with a small, precise sound. He turned around. 23 minutes, 7 minutes remaining on the clock. The room was completely silent. He looked at the 500 people in front of him, at the judges' row, at Warren Giddens. His voice was level, not triumphant, not performative, the voice of someone stating a verified fact. The solution holds. 1 beat. And the approach in step 2, it reduces a multi-page derivation in section 4 of your published proof to 3 lines. Same underlying structure. It couldn't be seen from inside the approach you were using. 500 people inhaled at the same time. A pressure change in the room you could feel in your sternum. Professor Audrey Wentworth stood up. She rose from her chair with the deliberate quality of someone making a considered statement. This is worth standing for, and I am going to stand for it with intention. She began to applaud, slow, clear, purposeful. The woman beside her stood, then a professor in the 2nd row, then 3 graduate students from the visiting faculty section, then more and more. The standing spreading through 500 seats not in a uniform wave, but in the organic pattern of something genuine finding its own path outward. Within 30 seconds, most of the atrium was on its feet, not the loud uniform applause of a sporting event. Something else, quieter than its volume suggested. The sound of people responding to something they were still processing, the way you sometimes recognize importance before you can explain why. In the 3rd row, Theo's face was in his hands. His shoulders were moving. He was crying in the open, unguarded way of someone who has been holding something very tightly for a long time and has just been allowed to put it down. Patrick Reeves was standing in the center aisle, his hands pressed together in front of his face. Bryce, who had come in 2nd, who had every reason to feel the distance between his performance and this one, was applauding with both hands above his head. Giddens was not standing. He was looking at the board. His arms at his sides, not crossed, which was somehow more telling than anything else, whatever posture he'd maintained dissolving along with the certainty that had produced it. He read the work line by line. Looking for the place where it broke down, he found nothing. Dr. Patricia Sims rose from the judge's row and walked to the center of the stage. The applause subsided as the room understood what was coming. 500 people settled into their seats. She looked at Giddens. Warren, is the solution valid? The atrium held what it was holding. Giddens didn't move. His eyes moved across the board one final time, giving himself one last opportunity to find the thing that would change the answer. It wasn't there. Warren, a degree firmer. Not raised, just firmer, the way you repeat something when you need the answer to actually arrive. Giddens stood. He walked to the center of the stage. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he looked at the board, and he looked at the audience, and he breathed in through his nose, slow and long. Every word came out as if being removed from a very small, very tight space. The method. Pause is unconventional. Pause, the result is sound. Dr. Sims nodded once. She turned to the room. The judging panel confirms the solution is valid. Elijah Tatum is the winner of the 15th annual Holcomb Mathematics Open. The atrium came alive real this time, the held breath finally released. Actual sound filling the vaulted ceiling and coming back layered. Someone in the back called out. Students near the middle were on their feet with phones raised, not performing but doing the thing people do when they want to hold on to a moment, and this is the only tool they have. Elijah stood at the center of the stage. He did not raise his arms. He did not smile. He picked up the chalk from the tray and placed it carefully back in the corner, neatly, the way you return something to where it belongs. Then he picked up his backpack, settled the electrical tape strap on his shoulder, and walked down the steps from the stage past Warren Gittes without looking at him. Not as a statement. He simply had nothing to say. And the things he didn't have words for weren't going to be served by eye contact. He was in the corridor outside when Wentworth came through the doors behind him. She moved without hurrying but covered ground efficiently. She came alongside him and he stopped, because hallways adjacent to where something large had just happened had a quality he had learned to pay attention to. She stood in front of him, nearly his height. She looked at him directly, with the eyes of someone who had spent 30 years developing the ability to see what was actually in front of her. "My name is Audrey Wentworth. I'm at Johns Hopkins. I know who you are," Elijah said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like recognition. The topological reframe. "Where did you study that?" "I didn't," he said. "I just saw it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to talk to you about a fellowship at Hopkins. Research position, full support, room, board, faculty mentorship." "Not today. You've had enough of today. But I want you to know the door is open." Elijah looked at her. 16 years old, 3 weeks of insufficient sleep, his grandmother in a hospital room across the city, a backpack held together by electrical tape. "Okay," he said. She nodded. Then she half-turned because Dr. Sims had come through the atrium doors, and Wentworth had something specific to say, and she was going to say it now, in this hallway, at this particular volume. Patricia, pleasant, professional, carrying because stone hallways carried everything. "I'd like the scoring records from all 3 rounds today, and the problem distribution data from the qualifying round last month, and the problem difficulty records from the past 3 semesters of the program." A brief pause. "I noticed some irregularities in how the faculty challenge problems were distributed. Purely for professional review." Sims held Wentworth's gaze. "I'll have everything prepared for you tomorrow morning." They nodded to each other, the small, precise nod of 2 people who have understood each other completely and are being careful about how much of that understanding they display in a corridor outside a room still holding 500 people. 12 feet away, Dr. Warren Gittes had stopped walking. He'd been moving toward the far exit, coat over his arm, briefcase in hand. Now he was not moving at all. His back was to Elijah, and his shoulders, which had been straight his entire adult life, the physical expression of 30 years of occupying every room from its center, had done something small, something that would have been invisible if you weren't paying attention. Elijah was always paying attention. Gittes walked through the exit door, into the parking lot, into the gray afternoon, into whatever came next for a man who had just watched the architecture of his certainty develop a crack he hadn't anticipated and couldn't fill. Sims turned to Elijah. "Your solution will be written up and submitted to the Journal of Combinatorial Theory. Dr. Gittes will co-sign as your faculty advisor. Standard departmental practice for exceptional student work." She said it the way you say something that is both fact and message. "I'll be in touch about next semester." She walked back toward the atrium. Patrick appeared from the crowd coming through the doors. He extended his hand. His expression was the complicated one of a person who had done a small good thing late and knew it was late and was doing it anyway. "You deserved this," Patrick said. "From the beginning." Elijah shook his hand. "Thank you. For the folder." Patrick nodded. He started to say something more, then didn't. Some things don't need the additional sentence. Theo came last, still visibly undone, eyes red, the particular disarray of someone who had been crying without caring who saw it. He stopped in front of Elijah and for a moment just looked at him. Then he grabbed both shoulders and held on for a second, then stepped back. "I'm buying dinner," he said. "Okay, Thai food, okay? You don't even like Thai food. I know. Okay." Theo laughed, short, sharp, more release than amusement. It was the best thing Elijah had heard all day. 2 hours later, after dinner, Elijah came back. The atrium was empty now, 500 chairs holding nothing but the silence of a room that had contained a great deal and been emptied. The stage lights were still on. They lit the chalkboard in a clean, even wash. His work was still there, all of it. The reframe, the collapse, the 4-line symmetry argument, the final line with the underlining. 23 minutes of work, exactly as he'd left it. Someone had taped a piece of paper to the lower right corner of the board. He walked closer and read it. A graduate student's handwriting, hurried but legible. Professor Sims said not to erase this one. He stood in front of the board for a while, not thinking about Gittes, not thinking about Hopkins or journal submissions or next semester, just looking at the work, his work, on this board, in this room. The thing he had built in 23 minutes from everything he had been building for 6 years in library corners and bus seats and a kitchen on Millender Street. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. The crack across the screen cut diagonally across the notification. He read it anyway. Aunt Renee. Elijah. She watched it. The night nurse helped her get the live stream on the tablet. I was sitting right next to her. When you erased the board, she grabbed my hand and held it. When you finished, she didn't say anything for a minute. Then she pointed at the screen. She said, "That's how Bia's boy does it. That's always been how he does it. She's asleep now. She's smiling." He read it once, again. A third time, slowly, taking each sentence in separately, the way you take something in when you don't want to lose any of it. Then he sat down in the front row of the empty 500-seat atrium. First row, center seat. He leaned back and looked up at the vaulted ceiling, the acoustic panels, the place where the stage light went up and simply stopped. His eyes went warm and full. One breath that didn't go all the way. Two. He pressed his hand flat against his chest for a moment. Then he took out his phone and held it up toward the board. His work, the stage lights, the small taped note in the corner. He took the photograph. The crack across the screen ran its familiar diagonal through the image. The board was still clear. He sent it to Aunt Renee's number. No words, no caption, just the image. He put the phone away. He sat in the quiet of a room that had held something important today and was now just a room again, holding nothing but the evidence on a green board that someone had decided not to erase. In room 412 of Detroit Receiving Hospital, Beatrice Tatum lay in a bed with a slight smile on her face. The tablet on the bedside table had gone dark, the screen timing out the way screens did when no one touched them. But the image it had last shown was still somehow present in the room, the way light leaves a trace when it goes. A 16-year-old at a chalkboard, 500 people on their feet. She slept. Her hands were folded on the blanket, rough at the knuckles. The right thumbnail slightly thicker from an old injury she had never fully explained. The hands of someone who had spent 30 years making a building cleaner and a kitchen warmer, who had pressed a white shirt in the evening after a long shift and taped a 3-word note to the hanger and gone to work without mentioning it, who had taken a bus east in her good coat with a yellow legal pad and sat in a waiting room for 2 hours without an appointment and gone home without mentioning that either. Her face in sleep had the specific peacefulness of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has set it down for a moment and is resting in the lightness of that. She was going to be okay. The doctors had said it and meant it. She already knew her grandson was. In his office on the 4th floor of the Caldwell Mathematics Building, Dr. Warren Giddes sat at his in the dark. He had turned the lamp off when he arrived. He hadn't turned it back on. The only light came from the parking lot outside his window and the thin line under the office door from the hallway beyond. On the desk, Elijah's first problem set, 12 pages, the B+ in red ink at the top. One line, computationally sound, conceptually thin. He had read it twice since sitting down, not looking for errors this time, just reading the work for what it was, which was what he'd known it was 8 weeks ago when he'd written that line. Correct, clear, precisely reasoned. The work of someone who thought about the reader. He picked up a red pen. He looked at the B+ for a long time. He crossed it out. He wrote A above it, pressed slightly harder than necessary as if the additional pressure meant something or changed something or undid something which it didn't. He put the paper in his outbox. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he kept locked, the one that held the things that didn't fit anywhere in the organized system of his professional life. He reached to the back and removed a document. Old paper, yellowed at the edges in the way of paper that has been carefully kept somewhere dark for a long time. Handwritten notes. Mathematical notation in the margins. A name at the top. C. Marsh, March 14. He had kept this for 22 years. Not out of guilt exactly. He had, over the years, constructed a working account of what had happened. About the nature of simultaneous discovery. About how ideas moved through a department and couldn't always be attributed cleanly. About what Calv Marsh's contribution had actually amounted to in the larger arc of the work. It was an account that held together at a certain distance. The distance at which he had maintained it carefully for 22 years. Tonight, looking at the paper in the dark, that distance had collapsed. Up close, the paper said what it said. The date said what it said. The formula was the formula. He sat there and he looked at it without looking away. He did not cry. He did not speak. He didn't do anything that would have looked significant from the outside. He just sat in his office of 26 years with a document he had kept for 22, and he let himself see it clearly for what it was. Not absolution, not atonement, not anything that tied itself up or arrived with relief. Just a man in the dark at the beginning of something he should have started a long time ago. Finally, starting it, seeing clearly. Just that. For now, just that. The 947 bus going west was mostly empty. A woman with grocery bags taking up the seats around her. An older man asleep against the window. Two students in the back talking in the way people talked when they'd forgotten anyone else was listening. Elijah got on at the Caldwell stop and found a seat by the window, notebook under his arm, backpack with the electrical tape strap. The photograph of his grandmother inside the front cover, her 65th birthday, head thrown back, laughing with her whole face, still taped exactly where it had been on the first morning he'd ridden this route. He did not take out his pencil, not because he had nothing to work on. He always had something to work on. But tonight he wanted to be on the bus, going somewhere, 47 minutes through a city that had seen hard things and was still here and was still in the places you knew to look, worth looking at. He watched Detroit go past the window. He thought about Wentworth and the open door at Hopkins. He thought about the photocopy folded in the back of his notebook, Calvin Marsh's handwriting, the date, the formula, and about what it meant to do the work that came next. Not just the mathematics, the other thing, the harder thing. Calvin Marsh's name belonged somewhere visible in the record of this field. Elijah didn't know exactly how to get it there yet, but he knew who to talk to. He knew what records existed. He knew what a person could accomplish when they decided something needed to be done and were willing to sit in a waiting room for 2 hours without an appointment until someone would see them. He had learned that from someone. The bus made its stops. The city moved past. At the corner of Millender Street, Elijah stood up. He settled his backpack on his shoulder. He got off. 4 blocks. 3 flights of stairs. The key in the lock. The apartment was quiet. Aunt Renee had come by while he was at Caldwell and left a plate, covered in fuel on the stove, with a note, "Eat something, baby," in handwriting that looked like his grandmother's and wasn't quite. He uncovered the plate. He sat down at the kitchen table and he ate slowly for the first time all day. The same table where he had first understood calculus at 11 years old, where he had rewritten problem sets twice over and eaten oatmeal in the pre-dawn dark and opened a letter from a university and watched his grandmother's shoulders do something they didn't usually do. When he finished eating, he took out the notebook. He opened it to a blank page and looked at it for a moment. Then he reached to the back of the notebook and removed the folded photocopy. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the table beside the notebook. C. Marsh, March 14, the formula, the date, the handwriting of a 23-year-old who had worked something out in this field and had his name removed from it before anyone outside a single office knew it existed. Elijah looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his pencil. He wrote at the top of the blank page, "Calvin Marsh, what I know, what needs to be known." He began to write, not mathematics, not yet. Just everything he knew, laid out clearly and precisely, the way you laid out a case you intended to make. What Patrick had found and where he'd found it, the dates, the formula, the gap between them and Gitta's publication. The things that could be verified from existing records and the things that would require more looking, the people who would need to be contacted, the institutions that would need to be asked. He wrote for an hour. When he stopped and looked at what was on the page, it was a beginning. Just a beginning. There was a great deal more to do, and he knew it, and he was not bothered by that. Beginnings were where everything started. He put the pencil down. He refolded the photocopy and placed it back inside the notebook. Not in the back this time, but near the front, near the photograph of his grandmother, near the place where he kept the things that needed to stay close. He looked at the clock on the wall, 11:14 p.m. He picked up his phone. He called Aunt Renee's number. She answered on the second ring. "Baby, I was wondering when you'd call. How is she?" "Awake. Better. She's been asking about you every hour since the live stream ended." A small pause, and he could hear the smile in it. "She told the night nurse she wanted to call you herself, but I talked her out of it. Told her you'd call when you were ready. Can I talk to her?" A shuffling sound. A low voice in the background, his grandmother's voice, and something released in his chest at the sound of it. Then the phone changed hands. "Baby." Her voice was slower than usual, a little careful, but it was her voice, entirely hers. "Hey, Grandma Bea. You ate something tonight?" He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Something real or crackers and coffee?" Aunt Renee left food, a small, satisfied sound. Then, quieter, "I watched you, the whole thing." "I know. Aunt Renee told me." Silence for a moment. The particular silence of two people who have been through something together and don't need to describe it to each other. "That thing you did," she said, When you erased the whole board. Yeah, I grabbed Renee's hand so hard she hollered. A pause. I knew you were going to do something. I didn't know what. But I knew. I didn't know either, he said honestly. Not until I did it. Another silence. Then she said, you come see me tomorrow. I'll be there first thing. First thing means before noon. First thing means before 9, he said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to one. Bring me something from that bakery on Ashland, the one with the good corn muffins. Done. And don't you bring coffee from anywhere but home. Hospital coffee tastes like hot sadness. Done, he said again. He could hear her settling back against the pillow. Her breathing was even, steady, the slow, patient breathing of someone who had decided to rest because she had earned it. Elijah. Yes, ma'am. You did good today, said simply, the way she said everything that mattered. Simply, without excess, with the full weight of what she meant behind it. He looked at the kitchen table, the notebook, the blank page with Calvin Marsh, what I know, what needs to be known written at the top, the photograph inside the front cover slightly visible where the notebook lay open. I had good reasons, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then go to sleep. You look tired even on the phone. He smiled. Good night, Grandma Bea. Good night, baby. He set the phone down. He sat at the kitchen table for a little while longer, letting the apartment be quiet around him, letting the day settle into whatever it was going to be when it became memory. Tomorrow he would go to the bakery on Ashland. He would bring corn muffins and coffee from home and sit in room 412 with his grandmother and tell her whatever she wanted to know. And after that, there would be the phone call to Hopkins, the beginning of conversations about journals and next semesters and the longer work of figuring out what came next. But that was tomorrow. Tonight there was just this, the kitchen table, the notebook, the city outside doing what cities do. Enormous and complicated and ordinary, and still here, still going, still full of people in lit windows carrying their own particular weights through their own particular nights. He thought about the boy who had found a calculus book in a cardboard box 6 years ago, who had carried it home for 50 cents and read it until he'd memorized the shape of every proof, including the ones where the missing pages meant he had to work out the ending himself, who had trusted the evidence, who had followed wherever was interesting without knowing he was supposed to stay in one place. He had come in from outside the system. He had learned in the wrong order from the wrong sources and hadn't known they were wrong, and that not knowing had turned out to be the most useful thing about him. He had walked into a room where a man had decided before he arrived what the outcome was going to be, and the outcome had been something else entirely. Not because he was exceptional in the way that word usually implied, but because he had never stopped going toward the thing he loved, even when it was exhausting, even when the people in the room had decided, before he opened his mouth, what his ceiling was. He had just kept going. He closed the notebook, he turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. Outside on Millender Street, the bus stop stood in its ordinary dark. Same cracked shelter. Same worn bench, same cold metal pole that no one had ever photographed or written about or given a second thought to, except for the people who had waited there long enough to learn everything it had to teach. Tomorrow the 647 would come, and whoever was standing at the curb when the door opened would get on and go.